On behalf of Bennington College, I'm delighted to welcome everyone to the second in our series titled the January 6th Project. I must say that I'm very much looking forward to a time when we can all be in the symposium together, and I certainly agree with that comment. But until then, I think we're all pleased that everyone is allowed to be at their home safely and participating in this evening's program. Last week, and all of you were here for this, but for those of you who were not, last week Professors Klavenberg and Bowman helped us to put January 6th into historical perspective. Tonight we have someone with us who was a witness to that history. Congressman Peter Welch has represented Vermont in the U.S. House of Representatives since 2007. He serves on the Energy and Commerce Committee, the Committee on Oversight and Reform, and the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. I'm immensely grateful to Congressman Welch for his participation in this series as we continue to work to understand the cultural, historical, and political events that led to the attack on the U.S. Capitol. And I see now President Walker, are you there?
Hi there, how are you? I am so sorry.
It's no problem at all. We've already done your introduction, which was great. And we have Congressman Welch with us, and so we're going to turn it over to him at this point, and then we'll all jump in and have a conversation. So with that, Congressman Welch, we thought it would be great if you'd be willing to kick it off by telling us a little bit about what it was like to be at the U.S. Capitol that day and have the experience that you did.
Well, I will. I'd be glad to. A couple of things. First of all, President Walker, thanks so much for all you and Bennington College are doing. And I'll tell you, you got a great person in Senator Campion. But he is doing an absolutely fabulous job in Montpelier. And my old friend, Mary Morrissey. We go way back. And it's nice to be with you virtually.
And thank you for everything you do for us. You are a fabulous representative of all colleges and all of Vermont, and we're so honored to have you here.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. The second point I want to make is I think it's great you're doing this because the biggest threat that we face in this country is the threat to our democracy, and it's real. You know, I've been serving in Congress 15 years. And I've never seen a situation where the basic norms about a free election and the peaceful transfer of power have been challenged. Never, ever. What happened on January 6th was, in fact, two things that have never happened in this country, never happened. One is there was an uprising against the person who was elected. There was an effort to overthrow the election of the people. And democracy depends on the sanctity of the election and the acceptance of the results. But the second thing is that violence was used as a political tactic, as a means of getting your way. And so those two things, challenging the outcome of the election and using violence in an effort to get your way, are things that none of us have seen. I'll give you a kind of a long version of that day. January 6th, we were all back, and we were there to vote to certify the results of the election. And as you all know, our vote is pro forma. It is the voters of Vermont decided who was the preferred candidate for president. And my job, Bernie's job, Patrick's job, was to just basically certify that that was the outcome of the election. There's never been a challenge in a systematic way to the certification of elections. So we have an official function to perform, but it's really a ministerial function. It's not anything that requires or allows for our judgment. Our job is to validate through that formal process the decision that Vermont voters made. And that's true for every other senator and every other representative whose duty it was that day to vote. The day started out with I live very close to the Capitol, really right next to the Supreme Court, and we were going to be convening at 1 o'clock. I like to get up and go for a run, but that day, of course, all the protesters were there. So I decided to take a long, slow walk from basically the Supreme Court to the Capitol, to the Washington Monument, to the Lincoln Memorial and back. And there was a big crowd, a lot around the Capitol, a lot around the Lincoln, the Washington Monument, and a lot of people with signs, a lot of people really shouting a lot of epithets about Nancy Pelosi, about Vice President Pence, a lot of signs with really pretty vile language. But on the other hand, we're used to protest in DC, and I didn't think that much of it. Nobody's wearing a mask, and I just was kind of curious and wasn't really at all afraid. And as I said, it's about a 5-mile round trip walk. But things got unusual when I was on my way back from the Lincoln Memorial and I got to the Ellipse. And I was there probably around 11 o'clock, 11:15. And that's where it was the most crowded because people were waiting for President Trump, who was going to be speaking in about an hour and a half. And that's where there was an immense amount of attention just within the crowds. A lot of people with bullhorns, a lot of people giving their speeches with a lot of QAnon theories, a lot of vile epithets being hurled at some of the politicians, but particularly Pence and Pelosi were the two targets of most of the attack. And a very, very riled up crowd, and much excitement about the anticipation of President Trump coming to speak. And I went out from there and was getting back close to the Capitol, where as I got to 3rd Street, which is a few blocks away, I saw something that, again, I'd never seen before. And it was two groups of people. I'd say there were like 70 people. And they were in military formation. And they had a person with a bullhorn who was directing them in their marching. And the marching chant was F those people, referring to everybody who was in the Capitol. And they were marching in a military formation. And again, I didn't think much of it, other than it was just unusual. And of course, later, it turned out that formation was used somewhat effectively to breach the defenses around the Capitol. And the other element of that worried me a lot was that there was an immense amount of anger, but it was very widespread. It was just targeted against everybody in the building. It was like a kind of white heat type of anger that I was seeing being projected by this crowd. So I went after that to my office and then went over to the Capitol. But despite what I had seen in the size of the crowd, I was 100% certain that everything was fine. It didn't occur to me. That there could be any breach of the Capitol. I mean, it literally didn't occur to me. And it's because I've been working there for 15 years, and the last thing I've ever been concerned about is my safety, or when Margaret is down visiting, her safety. It's just like the safest place in the world. It was my thought. Well, the Congress convened at 1 o'clock, and of course that was the height of COVID, if you remember. And we're still not out of it. So instead of all of us being on the floor, which is where we are, some of us were on the floor, and some of us were up in the gallery. And of course the House floor, any of you have seen a State of the Union address by a president, it's that room where those doors at the the president comes in and goes down the aisle and shakes hands with everybody, and then goes up the dais and gives the State of the Union speech. Well, if you remember, there's the floor where the president's walking in, and then above that is the gallery where visitors are. And that gallery was closed except for members of Congress and some staff. And I was in the gallery and would have been rotating down to the floor at some point. And as the process was underway and people were making from some states objections to the certification for their state, the first thing I saw that was obviously alarming was the security people that are always with Speaker Pelosi. As you know, she's the third in line, actually second in line for president. Senator Leahy is third in line. You know, goes Vice President, Speaker of the House, and then President Pro Tem. So all those people do have security. Speaker Pelosi, Senator Leahy has security for that reason as well. But the security people came rushing down. Speaker Pelosi was presiding. And they had a look on their face, and I was looking right at them, that said they knew something that we didn't know, and the speaker, was leaving. That was it. There was no discussion with her, and they gently escorted her out, but so quickly that she left her phone on the dais, and she was gone. And Kevin McCarthy, who's the Republican leader, was taken out, as was Steny Hoyer, the majority leader. And of course, all of us were baffled, because when we were sitting inside in the gallery, we had no knowledge of what was going on outside. You know, since then, I've seen all the video that you all saw. Some of you may have seen it in real time. But I was sitting in the safest, place in the world, okay? And I just couldn't understand what was going on, but I knew it was very alarming because the speaker had just been whisked off. And the proceedings were suspended briefly, but then they started again. Jim McGovern, who's the member of Congress from Massachusetts and the chair of the Rules Committee, took over and we started proceeding. And then suddenly there was a Capitol police officer who interrupted, and never in my entire time has anybody in the floor of the House spoken other than a member of Congress. Okay, it's like you know, I grew up in the Catholic Church. It'd be like the altar boy taking over the pew, or taking over the pulpit. You know, it just doesn't happen. And he announced that there was a quote breach of the Capitol, and we didn't know what that really meant. And he said we'd get more information. About 3 or 4 minutes passed, and Jim McGovern resumed the proceedings. But then suddenly, he was probably in it for just a couple of minutes, the guard came in and stopped all the proceedings and said the Capitol had been breached. And he told us that we should get on the floor. And also, he directed us, there are gas masks that are under the seats where you sit on the floor and where you sit in the gallery. And he directed all of us to get put on the gas mask, which obviously you knew things were different. And then I saw one of the guards upstairs, there's doors all that ring, many doors that ring the gallery. The guard went up and the door was open, and suddenly he pushed it closed. And that was the first inkling I had that there were intruders that were literally on the hallways in the gallery. And then what happened is that there was a slow movement of the members who were on the floor to convene in the center and then be guided out by Capitol guards. But those of us in the gallery had to go a long way. It was like a square, and we had to go around 3/4 of it. And the seats are very close together. And between every section, there's a railing. And we were being told to get on the floor, and then we were being told to get up and proceed like 10 or 15 feet and then get on the floor. And there was an element of, it was a little bit amusing to me. This railing was just a little bit too high to go over and just a little bit too low to go under. And I like a lot of my colleagues, but a lot of my colleagues in Congress are not particularly athletic, so this was a challenge for us to proceed. But one of the vivid memories that was in my that I have was that before we started moving, there was a young Capitol Guard who was standing by me and a couple of other colleagues. And he was probably about 35, very alert person, and he had his gun out. All the Capitol Guards had to take their guns out because we were hearing the banging now at the doors. And I was looking at his face, and I was seeing a man who, it was just apparent to me, the last thing in the world he wanted to do was use that weapon. He did not want to do that. And he was literally standing, right beside me, and I was on the ground. And I thought back to when I saw that chanting crowd saying "F those people," that one of those people was this Capitol police officer who absolutely didn't, that your life becomes awful if you have to use that, and he didn't want to. But I knew he would. If he had to do it, his duty was to make certain that I didn't get hurt. And it made me heartsick about the whole thing and concerned about him. Well, that went on for a while, and then those of us in that section where I was, actually everybody, we heard the shot where Ashley Babbitt was shot. And of course, we've all seen the videos where the windows were broken into the speaker's lobby. And that's a main entrance that gives you access to the House floor. It was unmistakable that it was a gunshot, but in all candor, I still really didn't believe it. Because how could this possibly be? The shooting in the Capitol just couldn't happen. Well, of course, it did happen, and that was about 20 feet from where we were. We were on the third floor. The house where the shooting was on the second floor, but it was literally right below where we were. And then after that, those doors, again, I'll refer you to, I'm sure, the pictures you've seen, it's a film you saw. There was an effort by the intruders to break down those two doors, which are the doors the president walks through to come into the House floor to give the State of the Union. And we were making some progress moving along, but I was right above those doors when I saw one of those flagpoles shatter the window and come into the House floor. And that's where the guards down there, and actually a couple of members, had barricaded the doors with some heavy mahogany furniture. And you saw that photograph also of several of the guards with their guns out. The intruders were unsuccessful in knocking down doors, but they came within an eyelash of getting into the House floor, both from that speaker's lobby where the shooting occurred, and that kind of ended that attack. But the attack from the speakers, from the other doors that I just mentioned, went on for some time. And we slowly made our way with an immense amount of apprehension. In all candor, that's when I was a bit scared myself, because a lot of us had been seeing examples of the protests that had been occurring in other places with the Proud Boys and the people in camo and the people who always had automatic weapons. So there was a lot of apprehension among all of us as to whether this would be a mass shooting kind of event. But eventually we were successful in getting to the far other side of the gallery where there were more guards, and where when we went out, guards had a number of intruders in custody and on the floor while we walked past them and went to quote the secure location, which was a big committee room over in one of the office buildings. And then it was a vigil, and we waited and waited, and it was annoying there because there was a big political fight between the Republicans and Democrats about whether we should wear a mask in that room. And even, as I mentioned, it was the height of COVID, and a colleague, Lisa Blunt Rochester, who's a member from Delaware, she, in a very gracious way, started circulating among all the folks who were there. It was all the members who had been in the gallery and on the floor, but a lot of staff members who had been there as well, just offering them masks. And she got a lot of grief from some of the anti-mask folks that I work with. So we waited there for several hours, where then at the end of this, ultimately, we made it back to the House floor after the building was cleared, and we proceeded to certify the election of Joe Biden as our president. It was shocking to me to walk around the Capitol when we got back, because I saw broken glass everywhere. Some of the statues were defaced. There was some graffiti. But what was the most extraordinary to me is I began then talking to Capitol Police. And I've been doing that pretty much every day since, as I walked through and asked them, where were you on January 6th? To hear the stories of what these police officers went through and how literally they were hand-to-hand combat, where some of our African-American officers were, they were assaulted with vile racial epithets. Where that man, that officer who did die, happened to visit with the person who was right next to him when he got attacked, and another officer who was a very close friend who was with him in the hospital when he died. But the trauma that they experienced was just profound. And then a lot of staffers, like the folks in Majority Leader Hoyer's office and Speaker Pelosi's office. I mean, these are people I know well and been working with for years. But as afraid as I was of my colleagues, they literally were barricaded in like one of the rooms in the offices, hearing people outside pounding on doors, and they had no way of knowing whether the doors would be breached. They had no idea whether there was any security there that would come to their aid, and they were in this state of total vulnerability and fear for several hours. So, and there was a lot of trauma for a lot of people, and I found in the aftermath actually the people who really had some lasting trauma were parents who had kids at home. That was really, really scary for those parents. There was some women who suffered previous assaults and it just brought just terrible, terrible memories. But it was a very traumatic experience for everybody. So that's on the human level. On the political level, and the implications of this, we did return, we did do our job. There was determination on the part of every single one of us that we were not going to let this assault stop us from proceeding, no matter what the hour, to do our duty and certify that election. And ultimately that was accomplished, I think, close to 3 in the morning. But I still have a lot of sadness about what happened, because 139 of my colleagues voted against certifying Joe Biden to be as the elected president of the United States. And of course, that was all Republicans from the House and the Senate. And many of these were people that I knew well and had worked with, in some cases for a number of years, where we had our political differences, but I always regarded them as having the same goals and intentions to try to help use this office that each of us occupy to make our country a better place. But I've also, Brian, it's no different with Mary. We accept election outcomes. That's not in doubt. Mary's a Republican, I'm a Democrat, Brian's a Democrat, but none of us, it would never occur to us to actively try to overcome the vote of the people. So these colleagues already made an assumption that, at least as to the fundamental norms of democracy, fair elections, and accepting election outcomes, we're on the same page. It's been said for me that that was not true. And the consequences of January 6th are continuing. This is why I think it's so important what you're doing to remember. It's not incidental. It's not just that we had a disagreement about the healthcare bill or environmental policy. It's a new time in America where elected leaders who have, I think, a profound responsibility to accept and reinforce the norms we need in a democracy to have any prospect of self-governance, challenge them. And it hasn't stopped. And what you're seeing as a manifestation of that is the lie that President Trump began projecting from the day of the election, that it was rigged and stolen, has now been taken up as a standard for many of the members of the Republican Party who are running for Congress all around the country. They have to answer the question, do you think the election was rigged? And they answered the question, yes. And of course, the second manifestation of this is all the voter suppression laws that are being passed in many states. So this threat that we saw in its very visible and very violent form on January 6th, where you attack the free and fair election outcome, is now being done in a more, quote, peaceful but very threatening way, where you make it more difficult for people to vote, and even more ominously, some of these laws, like the one in Texas, are empowering legislators to do their own assessment of whether, quote, the election was fair. And of course, what saved us in this last election was some Trump-supporting elected officials, like the Secretary of State in Georgia. He supported Trump, but he did his duty. And when the president said, can't you find me 11,000 votes, he did not do it. And much to his everlasting credit, he didn't. But what Texas is doing and Georgia is trying to do is now change it so that it's not the Secretary of State who will have the final say, it'll be the legislature. And again, this is why I think what you're doing is absolutely so vitally important, because this threat that we saw on January 6th, the threat to free and fair elections, and the acceptance of violence as a tactic is now being deployed by people in state legislatures in a different way, suppressing elections and making it possible for election results to be challenged for political reasons. So I appreciate this. Second, you asked about the commission that's in place. There was an effort to get a bipartisan commission. And in fact, Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy almost had an agreement. They actually did. And there was going to be no subpoenas, which is a big deal unless both sides agreed. They were going to agree on witnesses. It was totally bipartisan. It went to the Senate, and it was killed by Senator McConnell. And so Pelosi was faced with the dilemma of, all right, our independent or our bipartisan commission was blocked in the Senate, and do we establish a commission to try to get to the facts and get as much information out as possible, which in my view, the right decision and proceed. And of course, that has a number of Democrats and 2 Republicans, Liz Cheney, who's been courageous in this, and Adam Kinzinger, also a very stand-up person that I've worked with over the years. So we've got a lot of work to do to restore those norms that are essential to the well-being of our country. So I've gone on an awful long time, but I gave you the long version, Brian, and I hope that wasn't, didn't wear people out.
It's terrific, and I think we all recognize that this is an incredibly historic opportunity that we are all experiencing right now, hearing from you and your firsthand experience. The Congressman does have time for a few questions, so let's have a bit of a conversation here.
All right, so I've heard and seen many comparisons with the Capitol riot and the beer hall putsch in Germany. How true is this based on your own experiences with them and how they seem to have...
Say that again? I missed that
Go ahead.
beginning. What'd you say?
I just said, how have you heard... I have heard and seen many comparisons with the Capitol riot and the beer hall putsch in Germany. How true is this based on your own experiences with them and how they seem to have institutional support from elected Republicans? And what is your and your colleagues' plan to mitigate the growth of fascist groups that are growing in New England?
Do you want to remind all of us about the beer hall?
The beer hall putsch was like a preface to
Hitler.
to like Nazi Germany.
Well, you know,
Great question.
I don't know enough about it to compare, but the reality is, just on what we know happened, it was a direct attack on democracy and a direct attack to delegitimize the vote of the people. You know, fortunately, it was unsuccessful. The beer hall putsch actually was successful. But what we're going to do about it, this is going to be something that really takes all of us, because how did we get here? It's not just a matter of what Congress did or didn't do or what it can do. You know, we live in this new era where everybody has their own facts. In fact, you know, people go to their own media sites. Social media has been brutal in basically fomenting conspiracy theories, and the conspiracy theories have a real strong grip on people. A lot of the people who were there, they believed that the election was stolen, and that was a function of the President of the United States, a respected figure for many of these people, telling him it was, so he's a respected authority. And it's not like we can pass a law against the President speaking those lies. So, you know, I think we're all in this together trying to figure out what to do. But what is really clear is that a very major element of a very respected party, you know, I believe in a two-party system. And I'm lucky, and you're lucky, because we live in Vermont, where we've had a tradition of terrific Republicans, and, you know, Mary Morrissey's there, and good Democrats, where we have different points of view on a lot of policies, but we totally accept the norms. That's not true with the National Republican Party now, and you saw that with so many of the folks who voted against certifying the election, and you're seeing it with kind of new candidates. It's just a different place, and it's bad for the country. So I don't have a quick answer as to how we're going to turn the corner on this, but I do think from congressional standpoint, number one, you know, we passed out of the House what's called H.R. 1, which is the Voting Rights Act, and it's in the Senate, but that would establish protections that would be uniform in congressional elections, and it would stop the states from essentially doing voter suppression and voter interference and voter second guessing. So that's really essential to protect the vote. And then, so that's the most immediate response.
Great. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I know we're all aware that fake news and general disinformation incite and fuel violence. So my question is, do you think that at any point we'll witness the consideration and retribution for acts and omissions of all legislative and executive branch entities and individuals, obviously including the former president and his associates, as well as how their involvement in spreading this disinformation and spurring on these militant groups had an effect on both the events leading up to January 6th and January 6th itself?
So if you were to summarize that, really,
Yeah.
will we get to a point where
Yeah.
justice will be...
Yeah, will we get to a point where we'll see any retribution and ramifications for what happened?
Great.
You mean the accountability?
Accountability, yeah.
Well, let me answer that two ways. One, there's a lot of prosecutions, as you know, that are out there underway, and that's obviously the justice system that's imposing accountability. That's going to continue. But the real dilemma that we have as a country is that what inspired this is broader than just the people who showed up and did what they did. You know, there were a lot of people there who didn't violate any laws, not in the Capitol, because they had no legal right to be there. But the folks I saw when I took my walk, they all were there because they believed the election was stolen. And the people who invaded the Capitol, who attacked the police, they committed a crime. And they'll be prosecuted, many of them, and they'll receive punishment. But that reality for people that this was a stolen election, how do we deal with that? You know, that's a real challenge for us in our country. And it's not like we can just pass a law telling people what they have to believe. This is where social media has done an immense amount of damage by being a vehicle to conveyor belt of all these lies. But how do we deal with that and maintain free speech? Really, really difficult question. What responsibility do state legislatures have when the federal government is failing to act or can't? Well, it's significant responsibility. But you know, if we had more state houses like Vermont, we'd be in better shape, but we don't. So, you know, when you ask me this, it's a really, really good question. But as a member of Congress, I can say I support the election protection law in HR 1. And I will always do my best to be civil and understanding and constructive. But when people believe that the things they do about our government, then I don't know how we put that back in the bottle. You know, my view is that we have to be, I'm talking about, we're in the majority now, the Democrats, we have to be effective in addressing some of the economic needs and insecurities and climate change issues that are so essential. And if we start showing that we can govern, that may create some additional confidence in government and marginalize some of the folks who just want to tear it all down.
Great. Jim, you want to ask the question? And please, we're hearing that the audio isn't great, so maybe mask off if you're comfortable and speak right in.
Good evening, Congressman Welch, and thank you very much. I've been to many actions down in D.C. I believe in the right of protest, and it's effective and it's necessary for a democracy. But my question is about bipartisanship. And when you speak to your colleagues on the other side of the aisle, do they honestly believe the information that they've gotten from their sources, or when you talk to them one-to-one, is there any part that's left of bipartisanship? Do any of them feel any sense of shame or remorse over what happened? And thank you, sir.
Well, as you know, there were several members of the Republican Party who voted to certify the election. And that took, frankly, some courage, because they were under an immense amount of pressure from constituents, and they risked the primary, many were dead. So there's a lot of Republicans who did their duty. There's a second group who, in my view, didn't believe it, but were fearful of what their electoral consequences were if they voted to certify, and frankly, were cowards. And then there's a third group who do believe it. And it's just crazy. I mean, these folks, you know, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Matt Gaetzes, this guy from Georgia, I mean, and he's the one, served on the committee, and I heard him say this, and I couldn't believe it. But he's the one who described the invasion as essentially a normal tourist visit. Yet he was also on the floor when the mob was trying to break the doors down. So, you know, it's like selective memory or selective, I don't know what it is, it's just pretty crazy. But I put it in those three groups. The group that did their duty, the group that failed to do their duty because they were fearful and thought that their electoral future depended on selling out. And then there's a third that are the true believers and think the election was stolen despite no evidence to back that up. And the other part of this that's really worrisome to me is this. There's you've all been reading about how it's tribal now in politics, and that is true in that I'm talking Washington now because this is not true in Vermont. But there's a lot of my colleagues who, when I talk about the Republican side, will acknowledge that what they're proposing to do here makes no sense. But the justification is that we're worse, the Democrats are worse. So that's a bad place to be because it's not about who's better and who's worse. It's like, what's the merits of proposal A or proposal B? We've got to do things in healthcare, we've got to do things in climate change. We should be talking about what the merits of the proposals are. So that's a real threat.
So we told Congressman Welch we're actually over time, but Susan, I'm wondering if you might have a question. Are you okay, Congressman?
I am. I'm okay, Brian.
Okay.
I talk too long.
No, this is terrific. We're thrilled to have you a little bit longer. We just want to be respectful of your schedule. Susan, do you have a question from people who have been watching us online?
We actually don't have, I think because we forgot to ask people to put questions in the Q&A, we don't have any at the moment that I'm seeing. But I have a question that
Please.
we have I would love to ask the Senator. First, Congressman, I wanted to just thank you for your service to Vermont and to our country. I think just what you were describing, it's all the more important now for the congressmen and our leaders who aren't afraid to stand up and have courage for what is right and what is the truth. And so I can't thank you enough for what you're doing for our government. My question was that, earlier you talked about the Republican congressman that you've known for 15 years. This is a little bit like the other question that someone asked, but that's why I'm curious about just like human nature and how we've gotten to this point. And of course, some of it's political and a lot of it's about power. But what is different, and we heard this from the historians last week, is that never before has a major party, right, and our president actually believed that the election was rigged and won't accept it, and we're supporting the overthrow. So, given that you knew these Republicans for 15 years, how do you explain how their behavior is now? I mean, because you have to confront that every day. And I'm just curious, given that you know them, is it really just about elections? I mean, how do you explain this change in behavior?
Well, as I mentioned, there's three groups. There's the ones who voted to certify and they did their duty at some political risk to them, but it was their duty. And if the roles were reversed, I hope I would do the same. But the second group is political. I mean, every person in Congress is not a profile of courage. I hate to disappoint you all, but they were. And by the way, they would lose. This is the thing. That they lived in districts, these gerrymandered districts, where the voters they represented demanded that they vote to decertify the rigged election. Okay, so those Republicans who voted to certify it were at significant political peril, and some were willing to take the heat. The ones I admire, some caved, and I think that is political. And then there's a third group that buy it. And that's growing. that wing of the Republican Party in Congress is growing. And that's very, very alarming because the Republican Party that we knew, that I knew growing up, was fiscally conservative and strong in military defense. Those were two of the strong characteristics, and low on taxes. I mean, those were the characteristics. And there was the party of business in the national sense. And I'm a Democrat, kind of, FDR, JFK, and believed in the importance of government trying to do things to help everyday people. But there was a debate, because sometimes we might be doing more on raising taxes than people would support. Sometimes we'd be doing too less. But there was always parameters. Those days are over. Those days are over.
So finally, I think for President Walker, did you have a question? Laura, do you have any specific question?
No, I was just noting that there are some questions in the Q&A.
Oh, great.
I mean,
Are some now.
Okay. Susan, do you want to shoot one? We'll keep Congressman Welch here for just another few minutes.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So our first question is, and actually these are similar, some questions that are common questions. People are asking, what solutions are needed? How do we move past this division? Like, where do we go from here? If we're concerned citizens, like you said, we're all in this now.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for where we go?
Well, I do. I gave you the blow by blow on January 6th, and it's kind of a downer, we all got out of there. It was an attack, direct attack on elections and democracy, and was use of violence. But, I get pretty excited because there's a level of participation, particularly among younger people, who are demanding transparency, they're demanding a government that's more responsive, they're getting engaged, not just at the national level, where in many ways the spectacle of what you watch down there is just dispiriting, and it can be for me as a citizen as well, but are picking up, and getting involved with Bennington College, they're getting involved in the town of Bennington. I get so inspired by the urgency and the demands that the younger people have about climate change. I mean, that has been the issue that younger people have really brought to attention. And also the inclusiveness that is demanded by younger people. That has got such potential for the well-being of all of us. I'm in this job where I'm dealing with Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, I get a headache, right? But you don't have to do that. You can be in solidarity with other people who want a better Bennington, who want a better Vermont, who want a better environment. And, one of the things I've always enjoyed about politics, from the days I got involved in the civil rights movement, the odds are always against you. But it feels good to be doing something you think is right and to be doing it with other people who share that passion. So getting involved really is the path forward. There's no guarantee what the outcome will be. We want to know what it is, but in life it doesn't work that way. You decide what's worth it for you to be engaged, and then you're willing to pay the price of doubt at times, of setbacks at times, of disappointment, because you are doing it because you believe in it, and you're doing it with people you find share the same goal, and that solidarity of working together. I'll just give you an example for me, and a lot of people ask me, Peter, how do you do that job? Well, the last 3 days, we're working in the MG Commerce Committee on the climate provisions and the healthcare provisions and the Build Back Better reconciliation package, as it's called. But we were up till 2:30 in the morning Monday, 2:30 on Tuesday, and then 5 o'clock on Wednesday with with very little sleep. But I was doing it with my Democratic colleagues who I've got relationships with, and it was hard, and it was not fun, but it was important. We were doing it together. So wherever you are, there's an opportunity to find constructive ways to be engaged, and in the process, do it with other people and create that sense of solidarity that all of us need to feel the richness that life can offer. So, no, get involved,
It's great, and a great spot, I think, for us to leave it. Congressman Welch was kind of, we budgeted 45 minutes. He stuck with us now till almost 8 o'clock. I can't thank you enough. President Walker, I'm going to pass things over to you so you can have a final word. And then everyone, we're going to stay put. Those of you particularly who are in this class or taking this, we're going to have a conversation. And those of you who are still online are welcome to join us. A little bit about what we've learned so far from Congressman Welch and the historians that we've talked to, and just take a moment to sort of assess where we're at. So with that, President Walker.
Thank you so much, Congressman. This was really an immensely moving and powerful talk that you gave. And, you know, we are so grateful that you are keeping on and keeping on. And it sounds like as hard as this is, in some ways it has given you even more dedication and you know, kind of focus to really be one of those people who are holding up our democracy and fighting for it every single day. When you go through something like that, I can tell the terror must turn into, you know, great desire to really do good. And we are so, so grateful that you were here tonight. But more than that, thank you so much for the service that you do to the country and to Vermont.
Well, and thank you, President Walker. That was kind of you to say, but I really enjoyed being with you. I'm so impressed with Bennington College and the students and, you know, your engagement, because you're the future and you can't dodge the challenges. Embrace them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye now.